Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk a little bit about a game that took place on the opening night of college basketball season, and that was a game in the West Coast between the UCLA Bruins, a team that I actually predicted to finish in the top 15 in college basketball, had them ranked in my top 25, and also a Bruins team that before the season had started, I predicted to win the Pac-12. And I understand, when you look at this score, you see a Bruin team that was ranked in the AP top 25 going into this game on the road against an Aztec team that we know San Diego State was pretty good last year, but at the same time, San Diego State was unranked. So technically, this was a game the UCLA Bruins should have won. And after the game is over, you're going to look at the scoreboard and see, wow, the Aztecs won 73-58. It wasn't even that close if you watched the game. You never really felt like for a second UCLA was going to win. So the natural reaction for a lot of people is going to be, wow, UCLA was overrated. UCLA last year really wasn't good for the first 60% of the season until they really turned it on late, made a late surge, and I guess that was just a fluke. I do feel like there are going to be a lot of people out here saying that. But what if I told you that it's actually not the case at all? It's not it's the opposite, as a matter of fact. Not only is UCLA still really good and a team that I take seriously as a team to win the Pac-12, but for the second consecutive season, I think it's that we underrated San Diego State. I remember watching the Aztecs very early last season in their pre-conference Thanksgiving tournament. They had a couple games against Creighton, a couple games against Iowa, and they won both of those games. And not only did they win those games against teams that at the time were ranked, they ran them off the floor. And I just remember saying to myself, there's no doubt in my mind the Aztecs are one of the 15 best teams in college basketball. And I'm convinced as ever that last year, if the Aztecs would have gotten the opportunity to play in that NCAA tournament and make a big-time run, they could have at least, at minimum, made the Elite Eight. I'm as confident as ever in saying that if the tournament happens last year, the Aztecs would have definitely made a deep run and have won a couple games. They had that elite playmaking guard in Malachi Flynn, who was a first-round draft pick by the Toronto Raptors. They had the elite shot-making wings like Jordan Shackle and Matt Mitchell, both who are back this year, by the way. They had the bigs and the size in Yanni Wetzel and Nathan Mensah. Mensah is back. Unfortunately, Wetzel is not. But I do think Brian Dutcher, the head coach of the Aztecs, has done a nice job bringing in some new talent. That includes Terrell Gomez, the transfer who could really score, and I feel like watching that game against UCLA, the transfer from CSUN was really adapting nicely to his role of lead guard off the bench, and I feel like he could be a guy that with the loss of Malachi Flynn could succeed in his role in that San Diego State offense. I say it all the time on this show when it comes to transfers in college basketball, right? The worst thing you could do with a grad transfer, especially one that is coming up a level, so a guy like Gomez, for example, who played at a mid-major league like CSUN in the Big West, and sometimes they'll be transferring up to either a league like the Mountain West or either a Power 5 league, whatever, and it will be pretty obvious right away that what the coach is expecting out of them is just a little too much. We saw it at North Carolina last year with the two mid-major transfers they brought in, Justin Pierce and Christian Keeling. It was pretty obvious right away that the role Roy Williams expected of them was a little too much for them to do in the ACC, and it's hard because when you look at the numbers, you're going to see, oh, they average 20 points a game, but it was playing in a mid-major league, and a lot of times you could tell that it's just a little too much on the plate for the grad transfer. In this situation with the San Diego State Aztecs, I think Brian Dutcher has actually set up the scenario really nicely for Terrell Gomez to succeed, because I think this year with the Aztecs, guys on the wing like Matt Mitchell and Jordan Shackle, experienced players who have played under Brian Dutcher for multiple years, and guys who, along with Malachi Flynn, were really ready to go on a legitimate run in the NCAA tournament with the San Diego State Aztec squad. I believe those players right now are ready to take the next step and ready to lead this San Diego State Aztec team. So you combine those guys with Gomez and say, all right, Terrell, you could come off the bench, just provide us some instant offense. We don't need you to be the main focal point of our offense. Also, if you remember last year, San Diego State was very good. They were the last undefeated team in college basketball for a while. I believe it was until like mid-February, until they lost a home game to UNLV. And I remember the Aztecs and the trajectory of their season, even though they were undefeated for a while, really changed when Nathan Mensah, their big man, who is back, by the way, and I think if you watched the game against UCLA, you were really able to tell just how big of a difference maker he is. And I feel like his ability really changed things up for the Aztecs and really provided them to be much more flexible in terms of their rotations and who plays on the floor. And he's a big-time difference maker for this Aztec team. And I feel like him being back with another year in the system, plus the addition of the transfer from Maryland, Joshua Tomaic, I think that could mean a lot of nice things going forward for the Aztec squad, because even though they lost guys, Flynn, Wetzel, and Fagan, guys who were very important and big-time contributors to this Aztec team, they still returned 3 starters from Mensah, Shackle, and Matt Mitchell, who I think by season's end could be a legitimate All-American. They also have this kid, Agua Arap, who really was another main contributor in this game against the UCLA Bruins. Brian Dutcher has 10 legitimate guys that he could put into the game, and he even said, we don't drop off this much. This might be as deep of a team as we've ever had at San Diego State. And the more and more I look at it, he's not wrong. Last season, we know the Aztecs had a lot of top-notch talent. Malachi Flynn is the kind of guy who shuffles onto campus for a team like San Diego State not very often. Yanni Wetzel operated in the high post so well, and KJ Fagan infused an attitude that crept into the ball handler's hand. Now this year, with guys like Gomez, like guys like Trey Pulliam, I think San Diego State doesn't need as much production from those top guys like they asked of Malachi Flynn last year, and guys like Pulliam and Kashad Johnson and Arap and Adam Seiko could be guys that are all main contributors and on a nightly basis could be the main reason why the San Diego State Aztecs come up with a victory. And Nathan Mensah is back from those very scary blood clot in his lung, and I mentioned the grad transfer Gomez. He's a plug-and-play wing ready to go. Maryland transfer Joshua Tomaic. He was really able to show off his offensive production nicely. And keep in mind, while he was at Maryland, this is a guy that really was not able to come off the bench. And I feel like that gives the Aztecs coach, Brian Dutcher, some real confidence to go 10 deep against a team like UCLA. And key talent is now a year older. Pulliam, Arap, Johnson, Psycho, all of these guys are experienced players in the Aztec system, and they even have some freshmen, Lamont Butler and Keith Dinwiddie, who must feel like enticing gifts parked under the tree. The Aztecs had some guys that were very productive last season, right? They had Matt Mitchell and Jordan Shackle, and now they have even more potential to hit in the middle and in the bottom of the Aztecs roster, because there are plenty of guys that have some big time potential. Overall, it's a taller and longer team with Nate Mensah back. That's what Jordan Shackle said when asked to compare these Aztecs with last year's Aztecs. And I feel like Mensah, Johnson, Arap, those are guys that just make a bigger difference with their length. And you saw that against UCLA. It's very rare that you see a Pac-12 team go up against a Mountain West team, and it was obvious throughout the game that the Mountain West team was just the more physically imposing, and you could tell early that the Bruins throughout the game really were just going to have some trouble scoring. UCLA was the team I picked to win the Pac-12, and I totally understand they were playing without Jalen Hill and Johnny Juzang, guys that could start for that UCLA team and guys that maybe could have made a big-time difference. But these San Diego State Aztecs are a team that I believe is top 15, maybe top 10 good, and the Aztecs are a team that really 5 minutes into the game, I was like, man, I just underrated these guys again, because last year, when you watch the Aztecs, it was obvious that even though not a lot of people had them in the preseason top 25, they were clearly one of the best teams in college basketball. And even without Malachi Flynn, even without Yanni Wetzel, even without KJ Fagan, when the buzzer ended on Wednesday night against UCLA, the Bruins had 15 turnovers, and the Aztecs launched 15 more shots than them. The Aztecs led almost everywhere in almost everywhere. The Aztecs outscored the Bruins in the paint 24-12, out-rebounded them 34-28, outstole them 5-1, out-assisted them 16-10, and that depth, UCLA was outscored by the Aztecs on the bench 21-6. And when San Diego State walked off the court, they were no doubt, no hesitation, the better team than the Bruins. And San Diego State may not have that star yet. I think Matt Mitchell eventually could be that guy, but him and Shackle each had 15 on the offensive side of the ball. Gomez and Arop chipped in 10 apiece. And the San Diego State Aztecs are a team that is not going anywhere. Brian Dutcher is molding a team that once again is going to be in this conversation and is a team to watch out for. Now, the rotation led to the 16th straight win in a home opener for the San Diego State Aztecs, and as well as they played, I feel like there could even be more room for progress going forward, and that is a scary sign for the rest of college basketball. I say it all the time. This offseason in college basketball for me was one of the hardest ones to prepare for just because we didn't have an ending to last season. I had no idea if I was right about San Diego State. I was saying all of last year the Aztecs are good enough to make a Final Four and that they are one of the best teams in college basketball. And there were going to be plenty of teams that said, oh, they play in the Mountain West. They're not even good. They're undefeated for a reason. And maybe if they played in the ACC or the Pac-12, they wouldn't have been undefeated for as long as they were. But there were no doubt in my mind that if you watched the Aztecs last season, minimum, they were one of the 5 best teams in college basketball, and there was no doubt, no hesitation in my mind that they could have made a legitimate run. And when I watched them against the Bruins the other night, it just hit me again. The Aztecs are not going anywhere. Brian Dutcher is a guy that sometimes throughout the first couple of years of his San Diego State coaching tenure, he's been a guy that some people have been a little hesitant about. He's been a guy that before has had a lot of talent, but has been a little struggling to, reach the potential. If you remember that San Diego State team he had a couple of years ago with Malik Pope, they were not as good as expected, and they snuck their way into the March Madness tournament. Ultimately, they lost to the Houston Cougars. They were very disappointing the following year when they lost in the Mountain West Tournament Championship game to Utah State. They ultimately did not end up making the NCAA tournament, but last year, I do believe the Aztecs were different. They were super talented. They were legitimately one of the best teams in the country, and I feel like this year, the Aztecs could be right in that conversation. I believe Matt Mitchell and Jordan Shackle and even Brian Dutcher, they believe deep down that if the tournament would have happened last year, they could have won a national championship. I really do think they could have, and I think their coaches believe that as well. And when you look at the upcoming schedule for the Aztecs this year, they make a statement over UCLA. They'll start off conference play on December 3rd against Colorado State. They'll actually... I'm sorry, that game was canceled. They'll go to Arizona State, which will be a big boy game. They'll take on BYU, which will be a big boy game. Take on St. Mary's, and then they go to UNLV to open up Mountain West play. And the Mountain West Conference play is going to be very interesting going forward. I'm curious to see, with the regulations and guidelines in that part of the country, how exactly this Aztec schedule looks like going forward. But they play Arizona State, they play BYU. Those are 2 very good teams. They take advantage of their opportunity against UCLA and really were able to handle their business. So I'm going to give Brian Dutcher and his Aztecs so much credit for being able to get the job done. Watch out.